His former advisor to the former Afghan President Hamid Karzai. He joins us now from Kabul. Thanks so much for speaking to us. First of all, I'm curious as to why the Taliban would deserve any sort of goodwill gesture, not just given the recent attacks. I mean, 146 civilians killed just over Ramadan. But the fact that President Ashraf Ghani actually said the military has been instructed to go on the offensive against insurgents.
I think it's part of an agreement that has been signed between the U.S. and Taliban in February 29th, which said actually that prisoners would be released and that there would be some reduction in violence, and that would lead to talks, inter-Afghan talks. I think the government is perhaps not under any delusion as to these issues, but perhaps want the inter-Afghan talks to begin as soon as possible. I think the Afghanistan partners, in particular the U.S. and other international partners, have been also pressing for some type of breakthrough to get the talks start. And this was in the prisoners released and the insistence, in fact, actually the demand of Afghans for either ceasefire or a substantial reduction of violence are the two interlinked issues that would actually hopefully lead to the beginning of the inter-Afghan negotiations that could then talk about the future of the country.
Okay. I mean, is the government also hoping that this so-called goodwill gesture will also force the Taliban to recognize the government itself as an actual negotiating partner?
Well, so far the Taliban have issued a statement where they have welcomed the release of or the announcement of the release of 2,000 additional Taliban prisoners. However, they have insisted that it should be 5,000, as the U.S.-Taliban agreement calls for, that the U.S. will facilitate the release of up to 5,000 Taliban prisoners and up to 1,000 prisoners of Afghan forces with the Taliban. Of course, there's some issues of interpretation. It does not insist on exactly 5,000, but perhaps the process has now expedited, as one would say, that you'll see in near future. In fact, the Afghan government said 100 prisoners per day would be released, and or 500 per week. So in a few weeks' times, we'll have more than 3,000 Taliban prisoners released, which is a sizable number. And I think, and the hope is that actually, yes, the peace talks will begin. The Afghan government has established or appointed as peace negotiators, and that yeah.
I mean, do you expect, though, that from the Taliban's part, do you expect them to continue to respect this ceasefire post-Ramadan and post the release of these prisoners so that more talks can happen going forward?
Well, Afghans in the past, unfortunately, have been disappointed where there's been some lull in fighting, but that has been then followed by increased or even a spike in fighting. So there is that perhaps that history that does not makes one too optimistic. On the other hand, I think the fact that it has taken so long to start the inter-Afghan negotiations, the fact that there will be a sizable number of prisoners released or to be released soon, the fact that I think COVID and others are putting pressure on all sides to actually move forward quickly, and the international community is also perhaps getting a bit impatient with all sides that talks should begin. So there is some, I would say, guarded optimism that while Afghans would certainly love for the ceasefire to continue, but either that or a substantial reduction of violence will be in place post-Eid ceasefire in order to get the environment, in fact, more conducive for the prisoner release and also for the start of the inter-Afghan negotiations.
Okay, Kawun Kakar, we will leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.